Hello, world. My next guest has almost 2 decades of experience leading people operations within global telecommunications networking organizations of all sizes and mergers and acquisition experience. Her passion is culture building. And if you search for her on LinkedIn, and I highly recommend you follow her, you will see she is a great believer in people, relationships, and a true advocate of trust and transparency in the human resources arena. Please join me in welcoming Maya Sweiry, VP of HR here at Oktopost, to the show. Maya, are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
Of course.
I love that answer. It's the best part of the show. You see a little nerve maybe coming up, but then we kind of iron that through. So what I want to do, I find your background fascinating and for multiple reasons, and we're going to get into it on this show. But before we started this interview, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I was hoping you might be able to give us a brief, and I'm going to say brief because with 2 decades worth of experience, I know that this could be a whole other show. So if you could give us a brief look at your professional background and how you actually found yourself as VP of HR here at Oktopost.
Actually, my professional experience is way back to my 5 years of the military service here in Israel. And my first jump into the tech water was at 07 for a startup company. And ever since I worked with startups and they were acquired and all the things had changed and it's amazing. And after that, my last role was entering a rapid growth stage company. And when I heard about Oktopost and the product and the culture here, I knew this is going to be a super interesting adventure to be in.
Well, you've definitely joined at the right time. And I think what's interesting is you mentioned you got your start in HR, within the military here in Israel, which is very fascinating. And just kind of thinking back from the time you got your start up until this day, I'm sure a lot of things in the industry has changed. A lot of the way we do things have changed, right? I think a lot of times we're more digital than we were probably, 5 years, even 10 years ago. So I'm curious to know, as a VPHR, what is actually keeping you up at night professionally?
Yes, the world had changed and different industries work in different ways. But here I'm only almost 2 months at Oktopost. And what keeps me professionally up at night is actually HR assessment, infrastructures, and I see how it circles and it impacts the employee culture that I'm trying to reinforce. Because when you grow fast and you change, there are always things that change in the culture, and you want to shape it as best as you can.
Yeah, totally. And I can imagine, right, coming in to an organization as VPHR, looking at the infrastructure, with such expertise, there's a lot of things that need to be changed. But how do you go about it, as you said, changing at the right time, at the right speed? Definitely a challenge. So you mentioned something, right? How kind of what when you're looking at the infrastructure, how it's impacting company culture. And company culture is a term, if we go on LinkedIn, if we're talking with our peers, we're always hearing about it. Like when you're looking for a new job, you're always asking yourself as a candidate, right? Like, well, what's the company culture like? So everybody's talking about company culture. But I think what people are talking about less is how do you actually create and nurture an authentic and positive company culture that not only continually grows the talent that you have, right? Because you worked hard to get that talent and grow it, but also attracts the ever-changing talent that you're going to need as you grow.
It's a simple and complicated answer to that, because culture is around everything you do. It's from how the company is held on a day-to-day basis, how it's perceived on second and third degrees of separations, the rumors, the things that people speak of a company and people in the company. And it must be authentic. You can't decide one day that this is the new me, the new us. It should be actively acted. And if it's not authentic, it won't last for a while. And if you won't walk the talk, it will show and it will make you unreliable. And that's a whole different story that you don't want to be in when you're building a culture.
Definitely agreed. Now, in terms of company culture, what's interesting, and we hear a lot in our industry, is the term employer branding, right? And I think as we entered 2022, employer branding for both marketing and HR has become forefront of a lot of conversations that are taking place. But it's not so simple, right? So we're going to get into what it is and what it means, but at the most highest level of thought, right? And in your opinion, where should employer branding actually sit? Should it sit in marketing or does it belong in HR?
Um, as I see it, employer brand should be marketing used by HR. Therefore, in general, it can sit in both departments, but
Mhm.
it depends on the persona. If the employee brand person is marketing oriented, he will benefit from sitting at HR, managed by HR, and understand the client and the culture that he's driving. But if it's a person that comes from HR orientation, the organization and this person will benefit from sitting in marketing because he will know best practices and how to implement, how
Mhm.
he knows how to groom a culture into marketing tools.
Hmm. So how do you distinguish, or what's your best piece of advice to distinguish, right? Like eh, where that person or who should own it? Is it more just kind of understanding who's going to own it and seeing where they're stronger, what background they come from, or is it like a dotted line, like like how would it work?
Um, it says that the organization have the flexibility to decide. I
Mhm.
think in years from now it will change and it will be a different department in between. But for now, I would vote for a dotted line to the other department.
Okay. So they do need to be quite connected and working together, which kind of leads me to my next question, right? And we kind of hinted, right? Employer branding, we know, is popping up more and more. We go on social media and we see that organizations and employees are talking about the story of their organization or what's behind the people of their organization. And so, because we're seeing that more and more, and oftentimes marketers do include that in their marketing strategy, put aside marketing, put aside kind of that where should it actually sit. But in the eyes of an HR professional, how do you define employer branding?
I think employer branding is how to showcase everyone your theme, how
Hmm.
the company behaves on a day to day, what will
Mhm.
people will say about you when you are not in the room, and what the second and third degrees of separation from your company will say about you.
Interesting. So, so with that being said, right, it's important, right? Because when you think about like reviews on Glassdoor, or when you think about, right, like what people are saying about your brand when you're not in the room, that's important and it needs to be good. Right? Like, so you need to be able to showcase that, right?
Yes, it must be good, and it's not only about the company; it's about the people in the company, or even sometimes past employees of the company.
Hmm.
You can hear a note, I don't know this company, but I know alumni of the company, and he is like this and that. And he was very successful, he was this there, and this correlates in what people think about your company. When the company not always have a word to say there, don't have a standpoint on that conversation.
I didn't even think about that, but you're right. So often when I look at different companies, I'm not necessarily looking at the brand itself, but who's actually working there. And if I've had a good relationship with them, I automatically assume that's a good company because of the person that's there. And that's actually that's something you just taught me something live on this show, because it's not something I've ever actually put thought into. But now after this, I'm going to be challenged to think through our strategy a little bit. It's interesting. Right, like
I
alumni.
think that I think that this is the HR theme, and that's why I'm saying it's HR theme and it's HR doing. Because in HR, in recruitment, you decide you shape company culture, and when you decide to let someone go, for example, how you do it and who you decide to do it is also say something about your culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's so important. So listen, I know you have 2 decades worth of experience in HR, and I wish that this show could be hours long because I have so many questions for you, right? Because there's this stigma, right? There's always this stigma with employees in HR is like, oh, do we trust HR? What can, and here you are getting radically transparent with us today on the show, which I'm so excited about. But what's one thing that you know now about employer branding that perhaps you wish you had known a year ago? And then in that, how might have what you've learned would have helped you do your job differently?
I think that in perspective of employer brand, many HRs and me included have many tools to learn and how to and best practices that we know what we want to say, we don't know how we want to say that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I'm still learning, to be radically transparent with you. But I think I know better today what I don't know than I've known last year.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to throw a radically transparent question at you, right? Because I've got you on the show, and because so many of us marketers are wondering what on earth, what on earth goes on inside of an HR's head, we want to know what is one thing or a few things that you wish us marketers knew about your job?
Um, I think that marketeers should know that HR have many layers in it. And this is something actually that not always all of the employees are aware, that a lot of the HR work is done under surface with you leaders in the circle. And it's always something that the employees and marketeers are not aware. And one thing I would think I would want marketeers to know,
Mhm.
referencing employer branding,
Yeah.
is that they should come to HR and fully understand and get HR collaborating with them on how to do it, because sometimes marketing know amazing product brand and all the marketeers work about the product, but they are lefting out a whole arena of HR and people and trust and relationships because they know how to, but they are lacking the what.
Okay. Okay. So how, again, from the chair of an HR VP, when marketers are approaching you or, CMOs or VP marketing is coming your way, what are some of the best things that you've seen for collaboration? Is it like weekly meetings, monthly meetings? Like, how do you work together with the marketing team, or how should the marketing team work together with HR to really impact the story of the employer brand and what's actually going on in the organization?
I think that it should start by very candid and transparent conversations about the organization, the value proposition, the pain points of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then it should continue to building a methodology.
Mm-hmm.
No, it won't be the same in any organization as I see on the what and how to. And I think that in time it can be very short bi-weekly meetings on what to do and what's next and what's the next project. But
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning, there's a lot of time that need to be invested on building those infrastructure. And
Yeah.
I think most of all, trust.
Yep. That I think that's a hard one, right? Because in some ways marketing and HR, marketing is telling the story and HR really knows people, right? And so you have to trust one another that those are the expert categories of each individual role, but how do you bring those together and trust that process, or trust, right, that they're working for each other and not necessarily against.
And sometimes it's opening the kimono and really being very, very fragile to the other department. Because to talk about the pain points for HR, for example, to another department in the organization is always very fragile. and for marketing to share their pain points on how to end budgets and how they work their way can be also very intimidating.
Makes sense. So listen, I'm getting down to the last question. And it's actually my favorite question of the entire show. And one thing I will say, if anybody listening to this podcast is looking for some inspiration, Maya has such fantastic analogies. She posted the other day about taking the plunge and, sinking or swimming in an organization and just going for it. So if you're looking for some motivation on, just bringing your best self to work, I would definitely give her a follow. So with that said, though, Maya, what is one thing you can tell us about yourself that we actually can't find out on your LinkedIn profile?
That I love to sing. Actually, yes. When I was young, in my middle school, I had vocal lessons, and I hope to have time for it later when my schedule will allow, with family and work and everything. But this is something that I truly love, so I believe that I will return to it one day.
So perhaps you're suggesting, as part of Oktopost company culture, there may be a future preview of Oktopost the musical, perhaps?
One never knows.
You never know. Maya, thank you so much for getting radically transparent with me. If anybody would like to continue the conversation, whether it's an HR professional or a marketeer, where's the best place to reach you to connect?
I think LinkedIn
Mm-hmm.
and Facebook if someone wants, but I think that for those conversations, LinkedIn will be the best place to start with.
Fantastic. So we're all going to find you over on LinkedIn. Maya, thank you so much. And I look forward to having you back real soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast, brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you love today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.oktopost.com. Until next time.